a coffee-themed amusement park, a drink called Barbayada, and the cafes in Sydney and Melbourne, Australia square off. This week, it's all about coffee.
Traveling the world to bring you delicious dishes, tasty beverages, and interesting experiences. This is the Destination Eat Drink Podcast on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
I'm Brent Peterson. Welcome to Destination Eat Drink, the travel podcast for foodies. Destination Eat Drink is the place for foodies who like to travel and travelers who love to eat. And this week, we're finding the best coffee down under in Italy and in Colombia. But first, take a minute, rate and review the podcast. You're helping me out big time and helping out other foodie travelers find the show. And if you're planning a trip to Portugal or Spain, my foodie travel guide ebooks are your best bet for finding the best things to eat and drink and the coolest things to do. Lisbon, Porto, Seville, San Sebastian, they're all there at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink. Browse around and I'm sure you're going to find something. Maybe you'll even be inspired to plan a new trip. Okay, let's talk flat whites, frozen coffee drinks, coffee tourism. I'm ready to get wired, so let's drink.
Destination Eat Drink.
Justin Steele is the founder of Local Sauce Tours, a foodie tour company in Sydney, Australia. He tells me about the history of the famous coffee drink in Australia and his favorite places to get a cup. Aussies love their coffee too. And I just remember a few years ago when we were in New Zealand, I got into the flat whites. I love a good flat white. And if I recall correctly, and you can tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong, Justin, but there was a dispute as to where the flat white was actually invented. When I was in New Zealand, the New Zealanders claimed it, but I think the Aussies claim it as well. You want to dive in on that topic at all?
Yeah, so it's a common point of contention, and Australians and New Zealanders, we compete a lot on various things, saying who invented it. So, beyond the flat white, things like Phar Lap, the racing horse, we both say Phar Lap's, from our countries. Russell Crowe is another one. Crowded houses. It's a long list of things that we compete on. The flat white is one that, it's a bit tricky. Some people would say that Australians invented it and New Zealanders perfected it. But either way, both countries do a really good flat white. There's a guy who says that he was the first one who put it on the menu, and that was at a cafe here in Sydney in the early 1980s. And I don't think anyone on the other side of the ditch over in New Zealand has been able to find earlier evidence of a flat white actually being on a menu over there. So if that's how you rule it, then Australia might win. But regardless, lots and lots of good places to get a flat white. And, in general, the coffee standard is really high, in both Sydney and Melbourne and every city for that matter. A lot of people from Melbourne will say that, there's no good cafes in Sydney. I deal with that attitude a bit, especially, people coming up and disappointed that the coffee is not as good as what they have at their local cafe back down in Melbourne, which I think is a bit of a silly kind of claim, because they've obviously taken some time to find their favorite cafe in Melbourne, and then they expect any cafe in Sydney to be just as good as that one. But we all have our favorites, and it depends on where you are. But Google Maps is generally a helpful way to start, and just then check a few of them out. I don't think you'll be, disappointed at the standard across the board.
Where do you like to go for a cup?
I have different cafes in different neighborhoods, depending on where my nearest
city. So you're like,
depending on where my nearest
is.
tour starts from, I will have a favorite cafe close by. So, if I'm in Chinatown, I'd go to a cafe called Haven. If I'm over in Piermont doing my Hidden Sydney tour, I would go to a cafe called Mug Life. If I was in Surrey Hills, well, there's just way too many options in Surrey Hills. That is just one of the most kind of cosmopolitan parts of Sydney. So every cafe is good around there.
Monique Bayer is the founder of Walk Melbourne Tours. She talks about how a flat white is made and chimes in on its history. You do a focus coffee tour. It kind of blows my mind that Australia and New Zealand, too, are both so coffee-centric in their lives. This is where I fell in love with the flat white. And, I just love the fact that you guys make coffee such a central part of your lives. So go ahead, evangelize about coffee in Australia and Melbourne.
So to start off with, we'll talk about quantity before we talk about quality. But in the half square mile grid that I described earlier, Melbourne has just over 1,000 places to get a coffee. And what that means is that last time I checked, that is the highest per capita rate of coffee shops in the world. By kilos of coffee drunk per person, we are not the highest. That belongs to the people of Finland, that honour.
Right.
We certainly do love a coffee shop here in Melbourne. And a lot of Melburnians will be quite obsessed with going to their favourite independent cafe to get the coffee done just the way they like it.
What's your favorite style of coffee? Because I just did a video recently in Lisbon where I did 8 different styles of coffee drink in one day. And I told my friends I didn't even have to take the train home. I just flew. That didn't even cover everything that's available in Lisbon. So tell me about a couple different kind of coffee drinks that we should try when we come to Melbourne.
So if you want the most common drink, the one that is the most popular by a country mile, it is a flat white or a cafe latte. They are essentially the same drink now. They didn't start off as the same drink, but they are essentially both a white coffee now. And I know that some of your listeners who are very astute will say, well, what is the difference? A cafe latte is a normal Italian white coffee. It is 1 shot of espresso served in a glass, topped up with steamed milk, and then a little bit of the foam on top. And normally what we do is line up 2 fingers at the top of the glass, and the foam should kind of go 2 fingers deep, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. In terms of the head of the foam. Now the story goes, the one that I go with is that somewhere in New Zealand, a long time ago, a few decades ago, a particular barista kept getting asked by his customers for a strong latte with less foam. And he got asked one too many times, so he just made a new drink, which was a double shot latte with less foam, and he called it the flat white.
Right.
So the difference between the 2 drinks should be an extra shot of coffee and a little less foam. But I have to say that across most of Australia and New Zealand now, I actually shouldn't include New Zealand because their coffee culture is a little bit different. But across most of Australia, you'll be hard-pressed to find a cafe that makes a big effort to make a difference between a flat white and a latte. They are essentially the same drink, which is fine.
And you're going to need to be careful if you make it up to Sydney anytime soon and tell them that flat white was invented in New Zealand, because folks in Sydney take a lot of pride that they invented the flat white. And it's always interesting to have what I call these little food wars, which are, they're not wars, obviously. They're just little dust-ups between people saying, I invented it. No, I invented it. And when I talked to Justin Steele
yeah, I noticed that.
He's like, yeah, it was invented here in Sydney. I'm like, hey, man, whoever wants to fly the flag, fly the flag. It's all good.
And that's what I say. And I don't know if you picked up at the very beginning of that story, I was careful to say it's kind of the story I believe is this one.
Right. Coffee expert Rebecca Chauvel has traveled the world learning about growing, harvesting, and roasting coffee beans. She tells me about some of her favorite travels in Colombia. So let's go to Colombia. When I was growing up in the 70s, back in the olden days, that was really, Colombia was on this huge advertising kick in the United States, talking about Colombian coffee. And I thought as a little kid growing up, this was the only place where they grew coffee, that it was the only place that coffee was from. But Colombia they're a huge coffee producer, right?
Colombia is a huge coffee producer. And, you spoke about the 70s, and then there was some decades in the middle where Colombia had some civil strife internally. And I'm not trying to downplay that. It was very difficult for a lot of people. But they've really come out of that period and are very excited about having tourists back, about having people come in from other countries to see their country. I think because for so long it was really, there were almost nobody was coming in internationally. And I think that often that can play into your experience in countries if people are like, yes, please let us tell you about our culture and our lands. And there's a lot of great places to visit in Colombia. And one of them, I went for my birthday about 2 years ago. I was spent about 2 months living in Colombia, and it's very easy to fly domestically in Colombia from Bogota or Medellin or some of the other cities to the coffee region. It's a area that's very agricultural and very popular internally for tourism, for sort of farm tour. Well, more just like being in the country style tourism, right? Getting out of the city. And it is very high altitude, like much of Colombia, which is great for growing coffee. You're at the equator, so there's a lot of sun and a lot of heat. But the altitude makes it a lot cooler. And there's just this whole area internally called the Coffee Triangle, which involves a few cities, actually a few different states within Colombia are part of that. And there is just incredible coffee, as well as some other agriculture and gorgeous mountain views. And there's a decent amount of tourism, but the international tourism is relatively new, and the coffee tourism is relatively new. And I just will say, if you are leaving Medellin in Colombia, it's really important. It's pretty important to speak Spanish. So if you don't, go learn some Spanish, or maybe bring someone with you who speaks Spanish. It is not a very English speaking place. I do speak Spanish, so that was fine. But there was literally situations I was with people who didn't, and the people who worked at the front desk at the hotel didn't speak English, that sort of a thing. It has not gotten so touristy yet as to be English speaking, which can be a lovely experience. And you can go on some very in-depth farm tours with people in Colombia. I think they're sort of just getting to the realization point of, there's kind of more money to be made in coffee tourism than just in making coffee. Right. That's an interesting inflection point in any industry, in any tourism place. But it's still, I know Colombia can seem far, but there's a lot of direct flights to Cartagena and Bogota and Medellin from the United States. And then it's just a very short, very inexpensive domestic flight to the coffee region. And in addition to coffee, you can have some great food experiences. Horseback riding is also a big thing there. I don't know why horseback and coffee go so well together, but they seem to, and just some really incredible mountain views. They are dedicated enough to their coffee that they actually have a coffee themed amusement park in that region of Colombia.
Wow.
Yes, Parque de Café. And it's sort of like, a Hershey Park, but coffee instead. So you can go on a roller coaster where they have planted coffee plants around it, so that you are, as you're on the roller coaster, you're going through coffee plants, for example. And then they just also have a lot of coffee products, but mostly they're just celebrating this product that's so important to them, to their culture, and to their economy.
Everyone who's come back from Colombia has just raved about it. And so I think that's another good, vote for Colombia. And Bogota is like a foodie capital. So if you're interested in food, you're interested in coffee, Colombia is a place to go. Jackie DiGiorgio is a foodie tour guide in Milan, Italy. She's also the brains behind the brilliant foodie blog, A Signora in Milan. She tells me about a unique coffee drink in her city.
In the winter, you can find an interesting drink there, one that's few and far between these days. It's called the barbellada.
Barbellada, yes. I went into a place called, I don't know how to pronounce it, Hodeda, and because I heard they had the barbellada, and I asked for it, and the woman behind the counter started laughing at me. I was like, why? Oh. I was like, why? She's like, no, winter only. I was like, oh, okay. But I'm here now. Can't?" And she's like, "No, we're not making that for you now." And she pointed me to a machine. It looked like a Slurpee machine, and they had this. It's like a coffee slushy thing that they were serving for summer, and it was delicious. It was fabulous, but I still haven't had the barbellata yet. So where do you can? There are places I can get it year round.
From what I understand, there's a place that's the torrefazione that you had mentioned, the one in my neighborhood I was talking about, the Odaida, where they have the.
Okay.
It's it's a tricky name to say, yes. But I'm glad that you went there. I love that place. Well, it's in my old neighborhood now. I love it. They have a whole bunch of teas and it's really, I think they did a nice job of keeping their original charm, but being able to meet all the different contemporary tastes and preferences. There is a place called Vergani. There's one near Porto Romana, and there's a few other throughout the city, and they're said to have the barbellata year round. And Pave, I think you should have it in the winter as well.
We haven't even said, what is a barbellata? How is it made? What is in it?
So that is sort of, it's a hot chocolate drink, but it also has coffee in it, and it's topped with whipped cream. And you can find, that's pretty much the drink in its most basic form. At Torrefazione Odaida, they add rum to it. And it's a drink that dates back. Yeah.
You're making me regret even more that I wanted.
You just have to come back in the winter.
Yeah.
But it's a drink that's it's actually pretty cool because the drink itself has deco status, which is denominazione comunale, or communal denomination, because it's a drink, or it's a food, or a gastronomic product that's considered integral to the culinary culture of the city. Other dishes in Milan that have that are the risotto alla milanese, the costoletta, the mondeghili, which are meatballs, fried beef meatballs. So it's cool that this drink has earned that recognition. It dates back to the early mid 1800s. There was a man named Domenico Barbaia, and he worked at a cafe called Caffè dei Virtuosi, which was next to La Scala. And there's so many different stories out there. Some people say he invented the drink himself. Some people say he was the manager and one of his staff members created this drink. But whatever the case, there was this Caffè dei Virtuosi where the drink was created, and he is tied to it, and the drink is named for him. And it was wildly popular for, until the 1930s, and then it started to fizzle out. So it's kind of a shame that it's so few and far between in Milan. It's really hard to find. There are some chefs, though, who, like the chef Davide Odani, whose restaurant Dough is outside of Milan. It's in the province of Milan, but not in the city center. And he has a dessert version of it.
Oh, wow.
And then I recently... Yeah, it's supposed to be great. I haven't been to that restaurant in years, but next time I go, I have to try that. And there's a restaurant I went to recently called Mana, where they had, the affogato, which is the typical Italian drink where you flood a scoop of ice cream with an espresso. Mm-hmm. Well, they offered a pistachio barbellata. So they sort of flooded a scoop of pistachio ice cream with a barbellata. And I thought that was cool.
That is awesome. I kind of fell into a rabbit hole on this guy, Barbaia, who maybe invented it, maybe one of his employees did. That guy has a fascinating history. Like, he ran La Scala, he got rich off of making these these drinks, running these coffee houses, and he parlayed that money into becoming like this. He made all kinds of money. And one thing that he did was, apparently he ran La Scala for a while and ran the gambling operation, because in La Scala, they had like a casino in the foyer when it first opened. So this guy is like, he's not just inventing coffee drinks, man. He's got people gambling. He's lining his pockets with all kinds of money. And apparently at one point he was also basically an arms dealer during the Napoleonic Wars. At least that's what my research uncovered about this guy. Really fascinating.
It is. He was a hustler, and you're right. I've read all this stuff too, and I know after when he was done with Milan, he went to Naples, and he just sort of lived as this he became this opera impresario. Some say the most impressive of all time, if not the most impressive in Italy. It's really, he has a really fascinating story. He'd make an interesting biography topic, I think.
Yeah, it would make a great movie, I think. We'll film it in Milan. We'll film it in Naples. I think he was in Vienna maybe for a while.
He was. You're right. You were absolutely right about that. Yes.
Okay, that's Jackie DeGiorgia. I just love her passion for food in her adopted city of Milan. You can see her stuff at asignorainmilan.com. And I've got links to all my guests in the show notes. Well, that's it for this week. Next week, we're celebrating St. Paddy's Day with amazing pubs and foodie experiences in both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Don't miss that. Until then, there's so much more food and travel info at destinationeatdrink.com. I just posted a story about a meal cooked in a volcano. You can read that at destinationeatdrink.com/blog. There's also a new video. This one's about 5 things the U.S. does better than Portugal. Last month I did a video. It was about 5 things Portugal does better than the U.S. So in the interest of fair play, this month's is about things the U.S. does better than Portugal. And you can see that by clicking on the video tab at destinationeatdrink.com or by going to my YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/@destinationeatdrink946. And speaking of Portugal, if you're planning a trip, my Foodie Travel Guide ebook is your perfect companion. 17 cities and towns with the best things to eat and drink and things to do in places like Lisbon, Porto, and the Azores, as well as must-visit spots like Sintra, Braga, and Aveiro. All that for just $9.99. You can get that as well as my other foodie travel ebooks at buymeacoffee.com/destinationeatdrink. Destination Eat Drink is distributed by the Radio Misfits Podcast Network and Ed Silla. Thanks, Ed. I'm Brent Peterson, and I'll see you down the road.
Join us next week for another culinary adventure on Destination Eat Drink, a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.